I was 72 when my world tilted. My name's Clara Hensley, and for 40 years I'd been a librarian in our small town, curating shelves of novels, histories, and dreams for folks who needed them. My job was my pride, but my heart lived in my home, a rambling farmhouse with creaky floors and a garden that spilled over with roses, lavender, and vegetables I'd tended since my husband George and I bought the place 45 years ago. George was gone now, taken by cancer 8 years back, and every bloom in that garden felt like a piece of him, a reminder of our life together. I'd raised our daughter Natalie in this house, teaching her to plant seeds in the soft earth, to read poetry by the fireplace, to value the kind of hard work that built something lasting. I thought I'd raised her right, thought she carried the same values. That day in the garden showed me how wrong I was. It was a warm spring afternoon, the kind where the air smells of fresh dirt and promise. I was on my knees, weeding around the tomato plants, my straw hat shielding my eyes from the sun. My hands moved with the ease of decades, pulling weeds, patting soil, checking for pests. Natalie and her husband Greg were visiting, sitting on the porch with glasses of iced tea I'd brewed that morning. I'd been happy to see them. Natalie, now 42, with her sharp smile and city polish, and Greg always a bit too slick in his pressed shirts. I thought they'd come to spend time with me, to share a meal, maybe talk about old times. Then my foot caught on a gnarled root, and I fell hard, my knees slamming into the dirt, my hands scraping against a rock. Pain shot through me, but I bit it back, embarrassed but not broken. I heard Natalie's laugh before I saw her face, a sharp, careless sound that cut through the quiet of the garden. "Mom, you're too old to be out here digging in the dirt," she called from the porch, her voice light but laced with something cruel, like she was laughing at a child who'd tripped. I looked up, expecting a hand outstretched, or at least a flicker of worry. Instead, her eyes glinted with amusement, her lips curved in a smirk. Greg chuckled beside her, not even glancing my way, his focus on his phone. My cheeks burned, not from the fall but from the sting of their dismissal. I was 72, not 92. I walked 2 miles every morning, cooked my own meals, managed my own life. I'd run a library through budget cuts and town politics, raised a daughter alone after George died, and here was Natalie, laughing like I was some frail old woman who didn't belong in her own garden. I stood, brushing dirt from my hands, my knees aching but steady. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile, though my heart felt like it was cracking. Natalie waved it off, saying, "You need to be careful, Mom. You could really hurt yourself." Her tone was patronizing, like I was a liability, not her mother. I swallowed the hurt, invited them in for dinner, and tried to move on. I cooked George's roast chicken recipe, set the table with the blue plates we'd bought for our 20th anniversary, and listened as Natalie chatted about her marketing job, Greg's promotion, their plans for a dream vacation to the Caribbean. I nodded, happy they were thriving, hoping the moment in the garden was just a misstep. Then, as I cleared the dishes, I overheard them in the living room. Natalie's voice was low, urgent, like she didn't want me to hear. "The house is worth at least $700,000 now," she whispered. "If we can convince her to sell, we can book the resort, maybe even get that new SUV." Greg murmured back, saying my fall proved I was too frail to live alone. My hands froze on the dish towel, my breath catching. My home, the place where George and I had danced in the kitchen, where Natalie had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where every corner held a memory, was just a dollar sign to them. They weren't worried about me, they were plotting to sell my life to fund their own. I stood there, the towel clenched tight, my heart pounding with betrayal. Natalie, my daughter, who'd once planted sunflowers with me, who'd cried in my arms when George died, was scheming to take my home. The pain was raw, heavier than the fall, but it woke something fierce in me. I'd built this life with George, paid off this house with my librarian's salary, kept it alive through grief and time. No one, not even my own flesh and blood, was going to steal it. I went to bed that night, my mind racing, not with despair but with purpose. They thought I was weak, but they didn't know Clara Hensley. I was already planning, and I wasn't going to let them win. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it there? Drop a comment and please subscribe for more upcoming stories. The morning after I overheard Natalie and Greg plotting to sell my house, I woke with a heaviness in my chest, but my mind was sharp, buzzing with purpose. Natalie's laugh still rang in my ears, that cruel edge when I'd fallen in the garden, but her whispered words about selling my home cut deeper. My farmhouse, with its creaky porch and sprawling garden, wasn't just a place, it was my life, my history with George, the roots I'd planted over decades. That my own daughter thought she could uproot it for a Caribbean vacation felt like a knife twisted in my heart, but I wasn't the fragile old woman she saw. I'd spent 40 years as a librarian, organizing chaos, solving problems, finding answers. If Natalie and Greg thought they could outmaneuver me, they were about to learn who I really was. I brewed coffee, strong and bitter, and sat at the kitchen table, where George and I used to plan our garden, where Natalie once scribbled her homework. The table was scarred from years of use, each mark a memory, and I traced one with my finger, grounding myself. I wasn't going to let their betrayal bury me. I needed facts, not feelings. So I started with Ellen, my realtor friend who'd known me since my library days. I called her, my voice steady, despite the ache. "Ellen, I need you to check something," I said, recounting what I'd overheard. Her silence on the line was heavy. Then she sighed. "Clara, this is bad. I heard, through a colleague, that Natalie and Greg have been asking about property values in your area. They've even met with a developer, talking about helping you sell. They're acting like it's a done deal." My stomach churned. Ellen dug deeper, and called back an hour later. "Your house is worth $750,000, maybe $800,000 with the land," she said. "The market's hot, and they know it. They're pitching it as a teardown for condos. Condos." My garden, where George and I had planted roses for our anniversaries, where Natalie had built fairy houses as a kid, reduced to a bulldozer's target. I thanked Ellen, my hands trembling, not with fear but with anger. This wasn't just about a vacation, it was about erasing my life for their gain. I needed to know my own ground, so I pulled out my financial records, spreading them across the table. George and I had always been frugal, saving every extra dollar from my librarian's salary and his carpentry jobs. After he passed, I'd kept it up, living simply, avoiding debt. My nest egg was $900,000, plus the house, fully paid off since 2005. Natalie didn't know the details. I'd never shared them, wanting her to build her own life, not lean on mine. Now I saw her greed clearly. She thought I was an easy mark, a widow with a big house and no fight left. She was wrong. I called Margaret, my lawyer, who'd handled George's estate with a sharp eye and a kind heart. I told her everything, Natalie's laugh, the overheard plan, Ellen's findings. "Clara, you're as capable as ever," Margaret said, reviewing my health record. "You're 72, with no medical reason to lose control of your affairs. We can protect your assets." She suggested a trust to lock down my house and savings, making it impossible for anyone to force a sale. "Do it," I said, my voice firm, "and make it airtight." Margaret promised to have the paperwork ready in a week. I drove to the library that afternoon, my old sanctuary to think. The smell of books and polished wood calmed me, and I sat at a corner table, sketching ideas on a notepad. I didn't just want to protect my home, I wanted to make it untouchable, to turn it into something bigger than Natalie's greed. An idea took root, a community garden sanctuary, a place for seniors to gather, for kids to learn, for the town to connect. I'd seen urban gardens in other towns, places that fed bodies and souls. My 2 acres were perfect, fertile soil, a big barn for workshops, space for a small cafe. I could run it, using my librarian skills to organize, budget, inspire. It wasn't just about saving my home, it was about building a legacy. I kept Natalie and Greg in the dark, nodding when they called with their fake concern. "Mom, we're worried about you living alone," Natalie said one evening, her voice syrupy. "Have you thought about a smaller place?" I played along, saying I was looking at options, while Margaret worked on the trust. I started researching permits, grants, contractors. I called Tom, a carpenter friend of George's, who agreed to help with renovations. Every night I sat in my garden, under the stars planning. The roses smelled sweeter, the soil felt richer, as if the earth itself was on my side. Natalie's laugh had hurt, her betrayal had broken my heart, but they'd also woken me up. I was Clara Hensley, gardener, librarian, fighter, and I was just getting started. The weeks after I uncovered Natalie and Greg's plan felt like I was tending a new kind of garden, one of resolve, not roses. Their betrayal had taken root in my heart, but I wasn't going to let it choke me. I'd spent 40 years as a librarian, turning chaos into order, helping people find answers in the pages of books. Now I was writing my own story, and it wasn't going to end with me losing my home. Natalie's laugh when I fell, her whispered scheme to sell my farmhouse for a Caribbean getaway, lit a fire in me. At 72 I wasn't done growing, and I was about to prove it. I started every morning with coffee at my kitchen table, the same one where George and I had sketched garden plans, where Natalie once colored outside the lines. The table was my anchor, a reminder of what I was fighting for. Margaret, my lawyer, was moving fast on the trust, locking down my house and $900,000 in savings, so no one could touch them without my say. She called one morning with an update. "It's nearly done, Clara. Your assets are safe, and I've added a clause to protect any future projects tied to the property." That clause was my secret weapon. I'd told her about my idea, a community garden sanctuary, a place for seniors, kids, anyone who needed a patch of earth to feel alive. Margaret loved it, promising to help with permits and grants. "You're unstoppable," she said, and I smiled, feeling the truth of it. I called Tom, George's old carpenter friend, to talk renovations. We met in my barn, the air smelling of hay and old wood. I laid out my vision, a greenhouse for year-round planting, a small cafe pavilion for community meals, a workshop space in the barn for gardening classes. Tom scratched his beard, nodding. "It's ambitious, Clara, but doable. We can repurpose the barn, keep costs low." George would have loved this. He estimated $250,000 to start, using my existing garden beds and structures. I allocated $200,000 from my savings, leaving plenty for later phases. Tom agreed to start sketching plans, keeping it quiet. I didn't want Natalie or Greg catching wind, not yet. Ellen, my realtor friend, was my eyes in the outside world. I asked her to keep tabs on Natalie and Greg's scheming. She called a week later, her voice tight. "Clara, they're moving faster. They've got a developer offering $800,000 and Natalie's been saying you're confused after your fall, implying you can't manage the house." My jaw clenched. Confused? I'd managed a library through budget cuts, raised a daughter alone after George died. But Ellen had worse news. "She's forged your signature on a preliminary sale agreement. The developer thinks it's legit. Forgery." The word hit like a stone. My own daughter, not just betraying me, but breaking the law to do it. I told Ellen to keep it quiet. I needed time to build my case. I reached out to the town council, pitching Hensley Garden Sanctuary as a community hub. I'd done my homework, citing studies on how gardens reduce loneliness, teach kids skills, feed communities. My land, 2 acres of title soil, was perfect. The council was thrilled, offering a $50,000 grant to cover startup costs, with more possible later. I invited trusted friends, retired teachers, local gardeners, a few neighbors to join the project. We started small, expanding my vegetable beds, building trellises for beans, setting up a compost system. Every shovel in the dirt felt like a declaration. This was my home, my life, and I wasn't leaving. I kept Natalie and Greg at arm's length, playing the part of the uncertain mother. They'd call, all fake concern, asking if I'd thought about downsizing. Natalie even sent me a brochure for a senior apartment complex, saying it was safer after my fall. Greg stopped by once, eyeing my barn like it was already his, suggesting I sell George's old tools to clear space. I smiled, said I'd consider it, and changed the subject. Inside I was a coiled spring, counting the days until I could show them I wasn't their pawn. Margaret confirmed the trust was nearly ready, and Tom's crew was breaking ground on the greenhouse. The sanctuary was taking shape, and so was my resolve. Every evening, I walked my garden, the air cool and fragrant with lavender. I'd touch the roses George and I planted, their petals soft under my fingers, and think of him. He'd always said I was the stubborn one, the one who'd keep going no matter what. Natalie's betrayal hurt, but it also reminded me who I was. I'd faced grief, raised a child, built a career. This was just another challenge, and I was ready. I started a notebook, sketching layouts for the sanctuary, where the cafe would go, how the workshop would look, which flowers would line the paths. It wasn't just about saving my home, it was about creating something lasting, something no one could take. Natalie and Greg thought they'd won, but they didn't know Clara Hensley. I was planting seeds and they were about to bloom. 4 months after Natalie's laugh cut me deeper than my fall, I stood in my garden, watching the frame of the new greenhouse catch the morning light. Hensley Garden Sanctuary was coming to life, trellises climbed with snap peas, the barn was cleared for workshops, and the cafe pavilion's foundation was set. I'd invested $200,000 of my savings and secured a $50,000 town grant, with more funding promised. Margaret had finalized the trust, locking my house and remaining $700,000 in savings, so tightly no one could touch them. My home was untouchable, my plan in motion. Natalie and Greg thought they were selling my life for their Caribbean fantasy, but I was ready to turn their scheme upside down. At 72, I wasn't just fighting back, I was building something they couldn't break. I'd kept my work quiet, letting Natalie and Greg believe I was wavering, ready to downsize. They'd pushed harder, stopping by with moving company flyers. Natalie's voice all sugar as she talked about easier living. Greg even offered to help clear my attic, his eyes lingering on the oak furniture George had built. I played along, nodding vaguely, saying I was thinking it over. Meanwhile, Ellen, my realtor friend, kept me updated. The developer they'd roped in had upped their offer to $820,000, and Natalie's forged signature on the preliminary agreement was still in play. Margaret had the proof, a copy of the document, flagged as fraudulent by her contacts at the title office. It was enough to bury them, but I didn't want revenge. I wanted my life, my way. I invited them for dinner, telling them I wanted to discuss my plan. I spent the day cooking pot roast with carrots from my garden, mashed potatoes and apple pie, the kind of meal that felt like home. I set the table with George's favorite linens, the ones we'd used for every big moment in our life. They arrived at 6, Natalie in a sleek dress, Greg in his usual pressed shirt, both smiling like they'd already won. Natalie hugged me too tight, saying, "Mom, you look good, have you thought about that apartment we showed you?" Greg chimed in, mentioning how great it would be for me to simplify. I smiled, poured them wine, and let them talk about their Caribbean resort plans, their new SUV dreams. Every word confirmed what I knew. They saw my home as their piggy bank. After dessert, I cleared the plates and slid a folder across the table. "I've made a decision about the house," I said, my voice calm but firm, like I was addressing a library patron who'd lost a book. Natalie opened the folder, expecting a sale agreement or moving plan. Instead, she saw the trust documents, a flyer for Hensley Garden Sanctuary, with my name as founder, and a letter from Margaret outlining the forged signature's consequences. Her face went pale, her hands frozen on the folder. Greg's smile vanished, his fork clattering to the plate. "What is this, Mom?" Natalie stammered, her voice high. I leaned back, folding my arms. "It's my home, Natalie. My sanctuary. I'm not selling. I've turned the property into a community garden, legally protected, thriving. And I know about the developer, the $820,000 offer, your forged signature." I let the words sink in, watching Greg's face redden. "You laughed when I fell, planned to steal my home for your vacation. But I'm not frail, and I'm not leaving." Natalie's eyes darted to Greg, then back to me. "Mom, we were just trying to help. You could have been hurt." Her voice cracked, but I saw through it. Greg jumped in, mumbling about misunderstandings, but I held up a hand. Margaret had arrived, unannounced, standing in the doorway with a file of her own. "Clara's being kind," she said, her tone sharp as a blade. "That forgery is fraud, Natalie. You could face charges. Clara's offering you a chance to walk away, but this ends now." Natalie's mouth opened, then closed, her eyes welling up. Greg grabbed his coat, muttering about talking later. They bolted, the door slamming behind them, leaving their half-eaten pie on the table. I exhaled, my heart steady despite the ache. I'd raised Natalie, loved her through every scraped knee and heartbreak, but she'd chosen greed over respect. I didn't feel triumph, just clarity. I'd protected my home, my life. The next day I threw myself into the sanctuary. Tom's crew finished the greenhouse, volunteers planted new beds, and the council approved another grant. I invited friends, retired teachers, gardeners, kids from the library's teen program, to join. We built raised beds for seniors, a compost station for kids, a space for community. Hensley Garden Sanctuary wasn't just a place, it was a promise, to myself and everyone who'd been dismissed or underestimated. That night, I sat in my kitchen, the folder still on the table. I touched the linens, remembering George's laugh, the way he'd call me his gardener, with pride. Natalie's betrayal hurt, but it had pushed me to create something bigger. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The sanctuary was my stand, my roots growing deeper than ever, and I was ready for what came next. Hensley Garden Sanctuary opened its gates a month after I sent Natalie and Greg running from my kitchen table. I stood in the courtyard, the morning sun warming my face, the air thick with the scent of lavender and fresh-turned soil. At 73, I'd transformed my farmhouse and its 2 acres into something alive, something undeniable. The greenhouse gleamed, filled with seedlings, started by volunteers. The cafe pavilion, painted a soft green, hummed with chatter as folks sipped tea and ate scones baked from my old recipe. The barn, once cluttered with George's tools, now hosted workshops, gardening for seniors, composting for kids, even a flower arranging class that had a wait list. This wasn't just my home anymore, it was a community, a testament to what I could build when pushed too far. Natalie's laugh, her scheme to sell my house, had hurt, but it had also rooted me deeper. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The opening day was a celebration, the kind George would have loved. We cut a ribbon bright yellow, like the sunflowers. Natalie used to plant with me. My old library friends were there, alongside retired teachers, local teens and neighbors who'd become my new family. Ellen, my realtor friend, handed out flyers about our programs, organic gardening, seed saving, even a book club in the barn. Margaret, my lawyer, raised a glass of cider, her eyes twinkling. "Clara, you've outdone yourself," she said. "This place, it's you." I smiled, my throat tight, wishing George could see it. He'd have been out here charming everyone, sneaking extra scones, telling stories about our early days in the garden. The sanctuary wasn't just for show, it was for living. Residents paid what they could, some full rent for workshop spaces, others on sliding scales, thanks to the town's grants. There was Rose, 76, a former baker who taught kids to knead dough in the cafe. There was Jamal, a 15-year-old from my old library teen group, who'd found purpose tending the vegetable beds. We grew enough to donate to the food bank, feeding families who'd known George and me for decades. Every laugh, every shared story, felt like a stitch mending the tear Natalie's betrayal had left. I taught a gardening class twice a week, showing seniors how to plant herbs in raised beds, my knees steady despite that fall. At 73, I was running a business, living in my home, and feeling stronger than I had in years. Natalie and Greg faded from my life. They sent a letter a week after the confrontation, full of apologies and excuses. Natalie claimed she'd only wanted to help, that the forgery was a mistake. Greg said they'd cancelled their Caribbean trip, stuck with debts from their failed condo flip. I read the letter, then set it aside. Respect wasn't a quick note or a tearful voicemail, it was a way of life, and they'd chosen greed over it. I didn't hate them, I just didn't need them. My heart ached for the girl who'd once run through my garden, but that girl was gone. Maybe one day she'd find her way back, but it would be on my terms, not hers. The sanctuary gave me a new family. Rose and I swapped recipes, laughing over burnt cookies in the cafe. Jamal and his friends called me Miss Clara, their respect a balm to my wounds. The town council praised the sanctuary, approving another $25,000 grant to expand the greenhouse. Volunteers poured in, from retirees to kids, planting, building, learning. We hosted a weekly market, selling tomatoes and zinnias, the proceeds funding more programs. I'd used $200,000 of my savings to start, but the sanctuary was already breaking even, my remaining $700,000 safe in the trust. My home was mine, my legacy growing with every seed we planted. One evening, I sat in the garden under fairy lights, strung across the pavilion, sipping chamomile tea as Rose and Jamal played cards nearby. The air was warm, the roses fragrant, their petals catching the glow. I thought of George, his calloused hands helping me plant our first bed, his voice calling me his gardener with that proud grin. Natalie's laugh had hurt, her betrayal had broken something, but it hadn't broken me. It had pushed me to create this, a place where people weren't dismissed for their age or their falls, where community grew like weeds, wild and strong. I leaned back, my fingers tracing the arm of the chair George had built. I wasn't just Clara Hensley, retired librarian. I was Clara Hensley, gardener, builder, fighter. The sanctuary was my answer to betrayal, my proof that I was still here, still rooted. Natalie and Greg had tried to uproot me, but they'd only made me grow taller. The stars above twinkled, and I smiled, feeling George's presence in the quiet. This was my home, my life, my victory, and it was only the beginning.